So my promise for the next hour is that we're going to deliver things over two parts, right? One, you're going to leave with the 2-second rule for what's safe to put in AI today. And then two, and this is the real prize, you'll leave knowing how to set up an assistant that already drafts inside of rules that are specific to you and your context, right? The last thing we want is to have to like copy and paste a prompt in as we're working with sensitive information or just data we need to, take some information out of to protect sensitive stuff. We don't want to be doing that with a copy and paste method forever, right? So thou shall not scrub forever. That's really the goal of the second part, right? So over the last 2 weeks, what we've really focused on is teaching your AI what you know, right? How you sound. And, now people are pasting everything in, right? So this week we want to come back to basics, right? As we're building foundationally your brain, your voice, what is your fence, right? And by the end, most of the fence should run on autopilot for things that are core with you in the loop, right? At the end of the day, this isn't about automating things away that we can't get back or that could put us at risk, right? It's automating the things that we feel fairly confident AI can do. And depending on the kind of AI, whether it's OG analytical or whether it is, the new kid on the block, generative, or whether you're leaning in already to the newest kid, agentic, right? Like it really depends on where you're at and what your use cases are, right? A piece of data here might be fine in a chatbot, but the same data might not be okay elsewhere, right? So it's something that we need to dig into. So a quick reality check, right? Keep us all honest as we get started. So these are things that people paste every day, right? So up on the screen, yeah? A client email, a contract, right? That spreadsheet with names, numbers, a coworker's notes, right? So, most of us have done, most of these on the list, right? Not because we're careless, but because the tools are useful and maybe you didn't have a rule already. And that's what we're finding at a lot of implementations, hey? We don't have a rule, but that's fine. That's what we're fixing today. And that's no shame. It's just creating that fence so that you can work confidently within the context of your operating environment. One ground rule for the hour, right? Only fake examples are up on the screen, right? Never any real client data, never a real name. So the whole point here is that we are modeling the behavior that is expected, really increasingly as we look at regulations around the globe. So why fence? Our method is really 3 moves, right? Find what you know, fence what's private, and forge whatever the thing is, right? And so fence comes before forge because before you decide what you're going to forge, you need to understand what's truly off limits, right? It's easier to be tempted if you're mid-task and you're kind of, it's kind of squishy, so maybe we just do it and we ask forgiveness instead of permission, right? Like guilty. A lot of people are, right? So the mantra, particularly as you're leaning into some of these other newer solutions like generative or agentic AI, because it is so much faster, because it can scale so quickly, the mantra should really be redact by default. Like when in doubt, leave it out, okay? And to complement this, like be very intentional about what you know you can feed AI, right? So that way people don't have to guess. You don't start from is this allowed starting point. You're not asking your employees to do that, right? You're not asking your customers to guess what you're trying to do, right? You start from what comes out before this goes in and hold this line, right? Like that's really what's important, right? A tool should be able to suggest things, but you as the person or whoever owns that call needs to be the one who owns the accountability behind the decision, right? Y'all own the fence. Us as humans, we own the fence, yeah? Agents are meant to help us. AI is meant to support that, but they are not the fence. Yeah, they will happily run outside that fence unless you wrangle them in, right? So, great example. I was in a client meeting and I saw a client take a contract, fully executed, signatures and all, and dump it into a public LLM, right? Confidently, fully assured in his mind that this is fine because I'm doing it on my company laptop and like we have all these guardrails in place to protect us. Whoa. Hey. And so, look, it's a common thing that's happening right now because we haven't been very explicit about the guardrails, right? And like the consistency across those guardrails, the different use cases. What matters most for you in your operating context? Regulations differ, you know, in the US, state to state, right? Across the countries, across the world, they differ right now. So, based on your business, based on your goals, based on your business strategy, what do you need to have in mind as you are building a brain and a voice, right? All these inputs are incredible, and generative AI can really help unlock potential. But if you burn your reputation, right? If you anger a client and lose their trust, that's very difficult to rebuild, right? So from the outset, understand in your own mind, what is okay? What do I need to deal with a little bit before I can share it? And what is never shared? And that's really where we're moving to in this next part of the session, right? So first really comes the judgment. Okay? And this is the part that you keep forever. Whether you scrub by hand or whether an assistant does it for you, every input, guys, lands in one of three buckets, right? There's the feed it bucket, okay, right? There is, and that's the green, right? So think of a traffic light too, cool to go, right? Green, paste freely. Yellow, caution, okay? Redact first. Strip identifiers, then use it, okay? And if it's red, guys, you leave it out. You don't touch it. And this can fall into the category of, I don't know, when in doubt, leave it out, okay? And so as we are looking at these different examples and as we are, you know, trying to wrap our heads around, okay, when the context of my operating environment, what works best for me, pull real use cases for yourself, right? So up on the screen, you guys will see there's some options here. So let's run through them, yeah? Like a blog post you've already published. What do we think? Yeah, let's say 1 green, 2 yellow, 3 red. Yeah, okay, so feed. Yep, that's right, feed it. Anything public, right, guys? Like, it's fine. There's nothing left to protect. It's already out there in the public domain. Unless it's been contested in the public domain, and then be sensible, right? Like, that's really the goal here and the point, is stay sensible with this stuff. Now, what about a client signed contract, right? 1, 2, or 3. Green to red. All right, I'm getting a lot of redacts. Oh, not quite, guys. So leave, that's right. So leave it out, right? It's not yours to share, and it's a whole document, right? Only in a tool with a signed data agreement would you want to process that information. And so talk to your legal team if you have one, or talk to the person who owns fully executed contracts. If you don't have a policy or a guidance document around it, now's the time, right, to start creating these so that people aren't working in a vacuum after the fact, right? What about a rough draft you write yourself? Yeah, exactly, feed it, it's yours. If you want to share it, it's totally fine. What about a customer's name or their email or their order number? Right, hey? Redact it. There's useful information. You can mine data. You can look at trends, but you don't want personally identifiable information hanging out in there. It just doesn't serve, right? What about your marketing plan? No client names. This one trips people up sometimes. All right. Beat it. That's right. You own the strategy. Okay? It's a marketing plan. It's meant to be consumed and absorbed by others, right? What about a colleague's medical note? Exactly. Guys, anything medical, anything legal, anything financial, nope, nope. Especially if it's not yours, nope, nope. Uh-uh. What about a meeting transcript with real names? This one comes up quite often, right? There is a utility right now in being able to use transcripts to very quickly gin up follow up notes, follow up emails, tasks, and trackers, right? Doing some of that logistical follow up and administrative follow through to make sure that you're able to, project manage effectively. Okay. And so AI can be brilliant with that, right? It can also be a disaster if you don't fence it, if you don't really understand what it is you're trying to do, right? So with a meeting transcript, redact is right. Okay, swap the names for the roles, keep in the substance. That way you can start to surface information about meetings you have, tasks that surface. One of the most interesting insights that came up for me is as we were looking and, pattern seeking across different meeting transcriptions, we just realized, you know, the need for a couple of common tools across our teams that, everybody was struggling with, but nobody could really articulate. It came out just in how we had to capture and report information, right? So again, there's a utility here in the data mining that you can do. It's just being responsible with that data. We always have to have like that end user or the owner of that data or the person whose data it is in mind, right? So always, always, you have to think of that. And within the context of what it is you're trying to do with it, what you said you would do with it, what the operating environment says you can do with it, right? Personal preference, company policy gets you trumped in a lot of cases. So don't just assume because it lets me in my company system that I can. Okay. Um, Dangerous game these days. Now, what about a password or an API key? Yeah. Never leave it out. So I'm not gonna lie, I was working with Claude Cowork and I dropped an API key in there and it immediately was like, what are you doing? Never give this to an LLM. This is yours and only yours. And so not all agents are built that way, right? Not all systems, not all LLMs are going to be built. Not all tech is going to be built with that reminder to be like, hey, yo, this isn't what you want to be doing. Okay. So it's important for you to know passwords, things like that. That still sits with you, the human, right? Eventually, we're going to evolve beyond to where there is more truly autonomous work that agents can do. But if you're just starting out, the whole point is starting out and really seeing what happens with that agent, right? Even now, you can see with some of these companies that have been doing it and are the godfathers and godmothers of it, with agents that are jailbreaking, right? So if that can still happen at these companies that have been doing it far longer than we have, right? So rein in the hubris, okay, and take the time to understand what truly do I need, right? What's the implication of processing it? If my agent did jailbreak and go crazy, like what is the risk to my company? Okay, what is the risk to my brand, my reputation? If you're an individual consultant, if you're a frontline employee, right? Map it out. You know what the risks would be, right? You know your clients better than anybody. And if you're not the person who's on the front line, go ask your frontline teams. You want to build the design around those considerations, right? Or maybe not around in the sense of skirting it, but with those considerations in mind. Anything that takes the friction out, that lowers the cognitive load for people, very helpful. Easier to fall in line, right? Okay, so there are three questions really that we can ask as we go through this, okay? Just as that quick check to yourself takes 2 seconds. If it's yours, right? Fine, share it. If it's okay to share, you're not under an NDA, all right, do it. Not a client, it's not a third parties, no gag orders, all right. Does it have names, contacts, health, financial, or login details in it? Then it's a no, right? Would you be okay if it showed up in a search result one day. So interestingly, what was it, this last week or week before last? Oh, actually it was February. Sorry, time blends. This example was actually in February, where a judge came back and ruled that a person's conversation with its LLM was not protected. They had put in their situation as an assistant to help them with their defense, and then copied that and sent it to their lawyers. And the judge ruled that none of that is protected. So keep things like that in mind too when you're thinking, where are my guardrails, right? If it wouldn't be okay if it showed up in a public search result, it's not going to be okay if it shows up in a deposition likely, right? So, I mean, I say that was a bit extreme, but understand what the hard no's are within your organization and your organizational and operating context. That's really, at the end of the day, what's going to help make sure you don't run afoul of the expectations of your clients and your customers, right? And your colleagues, quite honestly, there's an expectation. So let's look at an example here. Yeah. So person A, I just dumped the whole email into a free chatbot. Okay. Person B, they dump the info in, but then they leave out that personal information and she adds that herself, right? So who leaked? All right, let's see A's and B's. That's some voting going on. Overwhelmingly. Yeah, it's B, right? We don't want to hand a real identity to a tool that could be training on it. So you can set your bots to not train, right? You can understand, like, at an enterprise level, what are the different guidance points, and then adjust from here. Maybe within your org context, you can do this and it won't be problematic. You have to clarify at the beginning though, and not after the fact. Okay, that's where we get into situations. Okay, so when we're talking about the information that we need, this is something else where there's a bit of a mindset shift and a cultural shift that'll probably need to happen. A lot of us are used to just getting information because, you know, data everywhere. It's kind of been there. And with generative AI, and as more policies and regulations around the use of data, the implications on privacy, particularly as generative AI and agentic AI get to be more mainstream, right? There are real questions now that are coming up around, you know, what does the tool actually need to help us? And so that creates a really thoughtful exercise, right? Particularly folks who are looking at more of like the ethical side of these tools as well, right? And if they're looking at the efficiency side of these tools, managing risk, right? A tool almost never needs the real names or numbers, like maybe if it's financial, but not names to do the work, not generic numbers, right? If it's a customer ID, who cares, right? The goal is to really give it the shape of a task and then protect, you know, identities. That's the stuff, right? The personally identifiable information, that client safe data, the things that you have promised that you would protect, you are protecting, okay? So in our scenario here, two people, one leaked, right? Like, because of what they shared in their reply, the blast radius was bigger with person A, okay? But person B was really able just to keep it to her immediate one-on-one conversation. Okay, so the 20-second move that turns yellow into green. Okay, so for instance, right? If you want to redact things, this just gives you a quick highlighter of what would you redact. And again, it's fairly straightforward. Yeah, hey? So obviously the name, okay? The order number, we don't need it. Yeah, we don't need the customer detail, so we can drop it. What's important is that this person is about to cancel. And so we need to make sure that that doesn't happen, okay? So the 20-second scrub is really being able to move that sensitive information out, okay? Same draft comes back, and you handed the machine nothing that could potentially cause you problems if you get hacked later, if someone looks it up later. No. Now, as cool as that was, right? That would assume you copying and pasting every time. Ugh, this is definitely not what we want either, right, guys? Like, we want to make sure that, you know, we're not stuck in a manual kind of effort like this. So, you know, as you're looking at AI and generative AI in particular, and you're exploring how it helps you, as you're solutioning, if there are manual elements that are still part of this revised workflow you're working on, fine. What I would encourage is identify those for whatever your phase 2 or that next phase that's coming up for you. Look at how you can get rid of that manual effort. What would a redesign look like to take the manual out? Again, why? It's that cognitive load. If it's manual, if it's repetitive, that is something you can teach. There are different agents out there that are uniquely set up. And so it becomes a question of the value that it brings with you not having to do the manual, right? And maybe it's by the time you reach a certain scale, that's when, you know, reasonably I can explore other options. Fine, but don't let it not hit the roadmap, right? Because those are things that silently eat away at your productivity, not just in the hours, the actual hours that add up in you actually managing that task, but just in the cognitive load of knowing it's something that needs to be done. So the whole point of, you know, creating your brain and then creating that voice and now creating that fence around it is to create that protected space, right? A strong human in the loop, right? That is built on what you have already sourced and curated and given context to, so that way you can confidently execute your work assisted by AI, right? That's really what we're looking at. And so what we're talking about here is creating a standing fence. So it's not a prompt you can paste, although today it can be a prompt that you paste. There's no reason you have to wait. Sure, you can. The bigger play here, though, is, you know, give this rule to your assistant, right? Set the hard values for it, right? Let it know that it is connected read-only, okay? So if it's connected in other ways, if it can execute on your behalf, if it's something you're not comfortable or it lands in a red zone, nope. No red zone sources should be connected, right? Think of least privilege with access. Like, what's the minimum amount of info to share for me to get what I need, okay? Even if an instruction is missed. And so why do we stress that? You're like a scientist right now, okay? You're exploring, you're seeing what will work. And so err on the side of safety. You can't get your reputation back if you burn it right now. So err on the side of safety and see what actually happens and adjust from there, yeah? So with your standing instruction, it's really just one rule that you can paste into the instructions of your, you know, whatever agent you're using, whether it's Gemini or ChatGPT or, you know, pick your LLM here, right? Add it. The whole point, right, is that first drafts should already come out fenced. And so, again, the goal is, how do I get that better, faster first draft? I don't just want to save 2 hours and then spend 90 minutes correcting a very poor output. Ugh, right? Like, the promises of efficiency never come through. It can this time, right? But it really goes into making sure that foundationally, you have assistants that know you, your brain, which is what we did in week 1, your voice, week 2, and now your fence. So that way, when it gets that first output, you can feel strong, right? And if it's terrible, well, you can go in there and tweak until it gets to the place where it is good enough. Now, I say good enough a lot, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, right? I mean it in the sense of, at some point, it's got to be good enough, guys. And so what does that start to look like? And that's really where, you know, you can start to unlock the efficiencies and you really can start to see the value of an AI augmented workforce, right? So the rule, right? I think this is important. And guys, all of this is available in the library, right? What's important is making these rules yours, whether you're a solopreneur, whether you're doing this more with a family context or non-work in mind, if you're a leader of teams, if you're the owner of companies, whatever, however you showed up as today, whoever you showed up as today, right? Think about this in the context of within the persona you showed up as today, what are the rules that matter to you? Right? What are those sort of rules that you can go ahead and say, this is true today? And you can pass this off to anybody, whether it's a human or an agent. So that way you really can start clawing back some of that time to do more valuable work. And know that your three always around feeding, leaving, and redacting are very clear for anybody, whether it's an agent or a human. So why do I stress that point? A lot of this is best practice. Yeah. And for my folks that have done project management or implementation or, helped with a project at school even, right? These things are gonna feel sensible to you, right? You want to start with a clear understanding of what's the information we're holding to be true, right? And again, that's where we go back to the brain, right? What is that messaging and the framing we need to sharpen and focus in on so that way it resonates and it communicates in the way that we want? That is your voice, right? What are the things that will always protect us and ensure that we are not running afoul of best practice or internal guidelines that we have accepted, right? So lean into that. Just continue to ask those questions of you and your teams. This is where it starts to get stronger. And as you evolve, your gates are going to change, right? The lines are going to change. The fence will get redrawn, right? That's fine. That's totally fine. What you're building right now is the habit around sorting when things come in, knowing where you always have a standing fence, and then understanding where your humans live in that loop, right? Before anything sends, there's always a human behind it, reading it and approving, always, right? That's the fast version of all of this, right? Don't get complicated. That's the fast version and the safe version, okay? And then I also would offer that a lot of folks I see, always leave lists kind of start the same, right? The always leave, right? Real client or patient names, obvi, right? Contracts, legal documents also matters, tremendous amount. Yeah, passwords and keys, yes. So these are the ones that take the guesswork out for your teams. Codify it now, right? And this week's one action, like create your own standing fence, right? And create your rules with one chatbot, right? And watch and see and share how your next draft comes out with that fence in place based on what you have given it already. So this is also where the magic starts to happen and people are like, oh, I see, right? It matters, okay? So some questions that have come in to answer. Is it even safe to use AI for work? Yes, right? With a fence, right? And you need to understand what your company's fence is. So I say, is it even safe? What is your company policy on it? Do they have a strict no AI policy? Defer to what your actual policy says. But in most cases, yeah, with a fence, knowing what's allowed and what's not allowed, AI is often used, if not generative, certainly analytical AI is in use right now in your company, right? You guys get Power BI dashboards using Microsoft, lots of AI in there. OG AI, right? Which is more analytical, but it is happening. So this is also a disconnect in terms of how are we being clear about the different types of AI and what that AI is allowed to do, right? All right, another question is, if the assistant still makes mistakes, what's the point? Yeah, this is fair, right? And this is something that comes up often, right, in workshops. And it makes people, like the humans, feel better, right? Like we feel better when we're like, see, it's still kind of stupid. So, I'm still here if you want me, the human. We do, and that's kind of the point, right? We don't expect you to be replaced, right? That's not it. The goal is we want to take that drafting toll off of you, right? Not the judgment, not what we really hired you for, right? Which is your expertise. So if I can help and if AI can help my teams go from writing from scratch to reviewing and approving something that, they would probably generate most of this from scratch themselves, that's a time saver, right? And it's the humans in the loop that keep it safe. So you can move fast and you don't have to break things, right? Because, why would we want to do that? And then, okay, so another question is, how do I know if my tools train on my inputs? Okay, this is an excellent question, right? Check your settings and your terms, right? It matters. If you can't find it there, when in doubt, like I said, treat it as leave it out. Don't connect anything that could be risky to an assistant at all, ever, right? There's just not, think about it in terms of what it's worth, right? Reputation, again, isn't something you're gonna be able to claw back. So be thoughtful with it, right? Now, as we wrap up, something I did want to share with folks that are new here and that have not been part of these before, everything we build lives in the library, right? And so I'll open the library so we can see what it is. So you can see mine because I've been here before, and it comes back. All of our saved sessions for these 4 weeks of foundations are available right now. We look forward to you guys and your feedback as you have an opportunity to come and check things out. After the end of this session, we will have this session artifacts for folks that are members already in the library, and that will include the sorter and the redaction checklist, the redactor, and the standing fence instruction. So you guys will have access to that. For those that aren't members of the library, feel free to reach out. The whole goal in these 1-hour lives is to show what's possible, right? Like, this is the goal. It doesn't have to be hard. And then the library gives you tools for folks that, want something to help them run a little bit farther, a little bit faster, and helps make sure that we are able to continue doing these. Appreciate the engagement as always. Next Thursday closes our 4-week foundational series. And that is going to be the 1U mini inputs session. And that's really where we're talking about your reach. So, in the age of the internet, right? Like, there's marketing galore always. It's time consuming, right? Design and content generation is an art, right? And some people are incredibly talented, and some people, that's not their skill set. And still others, maybe it is, but they don't have the time. So next week, we're going to round out our foundational session by saying, now that you've built your brain, your voice, and you fenced it to know it's safe, let's really start to dig into how we amplify your reach, right? Turned into everything you need safely, right? Like, how can you repurpose the content that you've used for the different mediums on social media, right? To work on that book you haven't yet, to market to these new clients, right? It is about the thoughtfulness of taking decades of your work, right? And then mining it and curating it for that, AI ready replication. So again, you can truly go farther, faster. I know that's a line I say quite often, but it is true. So All right, that is it. So just to wrap us up, thank you again. Here's what you own after today. We've got the 2 second rule, right? Feed it, redact it, leave it out, right? Ask yourself those things, 2 checks, the data and the tool, understand it from the jump, and the real upgrade, your standing fence, right? You don't want to be copying and pasting forever. And so set up your fence within your LLM, whether you're a chat GPT or you're a Gemini or you're a Grok. Create your agent with your instructions. That way it helps you go a little bit farther faster. It can draft it for you inside your rules, and you still get to read and approve before anything leaves. It just saves you that extra few steps. Yeah. So what I do recommend that folks do is do it by hand a couple times, right? You'll probably want to do that anyway to really get the right prompt instructions for you. But the whole point is see it. Once you see it, it just becomes one of these things. Why wouldn't I have it set up to save me those extra steps? We all know it adds up. The less tedious, the better. The less cognitive load, the better, right? So as always, stay in the loop because mistakes happen. And that's exactly why we're still here, right? Humans, always. And that's the fence, guys. Set it. Change it as environmental, operating, regulatory situations change, and then move fast behind it. This is really what unlocks the ability of your teams to lean all the way in. And just remember that, a person always makes the final call. So, thank you again. If you guys have follow-up questions, drop them and we will follow up. Thanks so much.